I started very young as a musician. I was 8 years old, playing trumpet, then trombone, and then was 12 years old. I came in contact with synthesizers. You know, that was the moment that the first synthesizers were in fact imported in Belgium. That's the time there were no computers, there were no MIDI connectors or something. So I was very intrigued about these new sounds. I was always intrigued about, let's say, the creative part of that. And when I was 15, 16 years old, I started to record with bands in studios. And that's the way I came very young, already connected to what you can do creatively in the studio and all the technical possibilities. Yeah. I was always intrigued, okay, in how can I improve the, let's say, the emotional experience from what we do and the sound from all the stuff. So that's the moment, and I was trying to make a new studio. Hello, AV Forums. I'm Wilfried, I'm the CEO of Auro Technologies. I would like to take you with me in a tour to the Galaxy Studios, which is located here in the heart of Europe. And of course, I would like to explain a little bit more about the Auro 3D format, which is invented here. What happens when, let's say, when I was about 16 years old, there was a record company who asked me to make an album, and it was like, oh wow, how to do that? So I had to prepare that, and I was doing it at home, and that was very difficult. And then there was like an empty chicken coop behind my parents' house in the garden, and that was the first idea of the studio. We said, okay, let's make a music room there, but instead of making a music room, we made really a demo recording studio there. And that was just in that chicken coop, and to isolate it well, we put like 9 tons of rubbers in the walls, and it was like a very good studio, in fact. And I was always investing in more and more equipment, and it was even the first studio in Benelux where we had a 48 digital recorder. Yeah, so I was having more and more international clients, but yeah, the chicken coop was getting too small. And then we wanted to expand that to a completely new building. And then I wanted to achieve something very special. I wanted to have an interactive studio complex. So that means I have like 11 bunkers. 7 of them are just acoustical different spaces, small spaces up to large spaces where you can put a full orchestra inside, yeah. And as well 4 different control rooms. A control room for film, a control room for digital, for analog audio, and a mastering room. And I did want not being disturbed, so I did want to have, let's say, full interactive possibilities visually as well, technically as well, without disturbing, let's say, potential other clients being busy on another production. Yeah. So to achieve that, every room is a concrete bunker which is standing on metal springs. This is a special development because the metal springs are designed that they isolate from less than 3 Hertz. They are measured on 2.8 Hertz. Yeah? And this gives an isolation value between each room for more than 100 dB. That's a world record. It is not being improved since it was measured, let's say, in '94. Yeah? And we have perfect visual connections between each room. To achieve that, the thickest glass panels in Europe are produced to put here in the walls. One glass panel has a weight from about more than 1,000 kilos and has a thickness from about 11 centimeters of glass. My brother, who was in fact leading this project, developed even a special lifting machine to be able to lift these glass panels in the right positions. Yeah? And we have as well the most silent recording areas on the planet. The background noise is less than 14 dBA. Yeah? So if you are in such a room and you are waiting like a few minutes, you start to hear almost your own system, your own noise, because there's no background noise at all. So that allows us to create a very pure sound. Yeah? Galaxy Studios is worldwide known, especially for the outstanding quality in the sound production. So we are busy very much with, let's say, with 5.1 and the compatibility with stereo. And I was a classical music engineer Werner Dabringhaus. He said, yeah, but what can I do with a low frequency effect channel in classical music? So, and even the center speaker is very difficult to use in classical music. So he said, I'm using those 2 channels and I'm putting those 2 channels above the stereo. And I'm putting 2 microphones on top of it. And I thought, okay, that's interesting to have, let's say, some extra reflections. But when I heard it, I was very intrigued about it because, wow, there was so much more harmonics in the front, so much more depth. And I started to do some of my own pop productions in 5.1 on the bottom and just that stereo up. And I was having a lot of three-dimensional information from the front, but not from the back. And I added just like, say, 2 speakers on the back, 7.1 on the bottom with 2 up. Yeah. But finally I didn't like that format either. It was not having that, let's say, that natural spread of sound. And it is the moment when I was picking up these 2 extra speakers and I'm putting them up high, meaning 5.1 on the bottom, and that quadraphonic second layer, that was a magical moment in my life. That was in fact the born of Auro 9.1. It was the first time in my life I was so immersed about sound. I was so middle of that whole sound and field around me. The big question is of course always, what is Auro 3D? Auro 3D is in fact a combination of listening formats, scalable listening formats, as well as a technology to bring that experience into home. It's about 3D sound experience. And a lot of people said to me when I came in 2005, 2006 already to the market with this concept, then people said, yeah, I have already 3D sound at home. So they say, wow, that's not possible, yeah, because it's not a common format. 5.1 and 7.1 is commonly believed as a 3D sound format. It's not. In fact, it's a 2-dimensional format because sounds are coming only from a horizontal plane around the listener. Yeah. And when I started to experience with height, yeah, then I was suddenly seeing from, oh, the 3rd dimension is missing. And that's what Auro 3D does. So we add that 3rd dimension, yeah, and that brings a completely new immersive experience, much more than most people would believe. So what we try to achieve to have an immersive effect is coming as close as possible to a lifelike sound. So if you feel like a picture, if you see a picture, to feel that picture, everything around you should be like you hear the whole picture. Yeah? And I did a lot of tests of it, and I came out the fact that you absolutely need at least 3 layers to do that. So let's say most of the sounds from the screen are coming a little bit below the senders, the source sounds. So if they're moving and they're passing by, you should feel them like they're there. Yeah? So if there's like a bike or a car and you're watching the screen, you should feel the bike passing on the place where you typically want to hear it. So if you're putting the speakers a little bit too high, then everything feels like you are flying it. So we typically what we do is we keep the standard 5.1 sound. So the whole Auro 3D concept is based on the existing placement of the standard 5.1. Yeah? But we add on top of that a height layer. You see it as well on the screen. So we have in the screens a height layer, the top of the screen, as well the height layer there. Yeah? Now, what we can do especially is that vertical stereo layer, yeah, from about 20 to 30 degrees above the original, let's say, original lower layer, yeah, that creates a very special immersive effect. Some people think about immersive sound that it's like, say, adding the ceiling channel. That's not. We are less sensitive as human beings from sounds coming from above. Okay, you need that when, let's say, some flyover effects or some certain special effects, yeah, you can use it. But most of the time, all sounds in nature are coming from ear level and a little bit above about, let's say, source sounds and the reflections of it. We are most sensitive for sounds coming from the bottom up till about 50, 60 degrees. We are less sensitive for sounds coming from there. So that vertical stereo field in front of us and on the sides around us, that makes our 3D sound so special and so, let's say, much more lifelike sound than we are used to hear. So above the, let's say, the lower layer, the ear level layer and the height layer, we have a 3rd layer, and we call it top layer, and sometimes we call it as well voice of God speakers, because they're like really coming directly from above us. Yeah. Now those, let's say, those channels are not so important in a small room. Of course, in a big cinema theater, or like in a cinema theater, you need that to fill, of course, the gap and to have, let's say, that immersive effect for a hemisphere around you. Yeah, it is used especially for flyover effects, not as much for reflections. Yeah, the moment that you record an orchestra and you put, let's say, some reflections there, the moment when you start to hear them, it sounds very unnatural, because most of the natural sounds don't have reflections coming from above. There are less reflections coming from above. Yeah. You see, we have here 2 rows. In fact, it is the same sound coming from each row. The idea is that we use a mono channel to give as much as possible people the same overhead experience, because if we use different channels here, if you're sitting on the side, you can have not, let's say, an overhead experience, because then it's already too far out of the corner. So to have that overhead experience, we give as much as possible rows that everybody has the same experience coming from above. So let's say the most important two layers are the low level layer and the height layer. That's very important to get that immersive effect, because typically they're not coming from above. Most of the acoustical reflections and the source sounds are coming from the side. So that's the reason why, let's say, these two layers are most important, and especially that in-between layer, that height layer, that's unique to Auro 3D. All other formats don't have that. Yeah. So what we try to achieve with Auro 3D as well, a very good localization of what is on the screen. When it comes out of the screen into the theater, then it feels like you are there. Yeah? And that makes it very immersive. The art of creating a picture with sound, that sound is like a lifelike sound, that brings our subconscious like we are there. And that's about the immersive effect with Auro 3D. So what makes Auro 3D very special as well is the front height channels combined with the normal channels. Yeah? It is that vertical stereo field that allows us to place the source sounds coherent with what you're seeing on the screen. But secondly, that vertical stereo field creates as well much more harmonics. Much more harmonics means the color of the sound is much more natural, the timbre, and there's like some extra depth as well. It is that what is making the sound much more natural in front of us. So immersive sound is not related to an object or channel-based technology. It's mainly to try to recreate a natural sphere, atmosphere around us. Yeah. So, and what I've started to see is that the way to do that is completely different than the way we are thinking in a horizontal plane. Our vertical sense and our vertical positioning of sounds works completely different for our brain than a horizontal one, because we can easily feel differences of, let's say, feel a little space difference in a horizontal plane. If you pan a sound from the left to the right, for instance, yeah, there are like many places where you can have, let's say, phantom sources. There are no speakers in between, but it feels like it is in between the speakers due to the volume, the balance you take between to left and right. Yeah. Now that doesn't work the same in the vertical plane. Vertically we cannot position sounds. You can, but you need really speakers there. So you cannot just say, okay, I take a vertical stereo field from 60 degrees and I place their sounds in between. It doesn't work. And I was not understanding why it didn't work. So I was seeing it in the meters on the console that really the sound was traveling up, but I didn't hear it. It's the moment when I turned my head like that, then I was hearing the sound going up. And then I realized, oh, it's mainly the time difference between left and right ear which is helping us as well to locate sounds. But for the vertical axis it doesn't work like that, because we do not have an ear here to hear that time differences. Yeah? That works mainly with reflections. So it is so important for our brain to have a lot of information about reflections. That reflection area needs as well a certain angle, because if the speakers between the lower and the height layer, if it is a little bit too far away, then it is not a coherent field anymore to have reflections from it. So we did a lot of tests, and typically a 30-degree difference between the lower and that height layer, that brings, let's say, that immersive natural effect from, let's say, the combination of source sounds and reflections. That has nothing to do with the ceiling channel. The ceiling channel is less important to recreate these reflections. So the speaker layout is already one important thing to have a very immersive effect, which is not related, let's say, to object-based or channel-based technology. So for home cinema, if you think about the most efficient sound in 3D system, then it is about Auro 9.1, which is 5.1 on the bottom, because we want to be compatible with all 5.1 main standard content. And then on top of that we have a quadraphonic layer, and it is that layer that creates that immersive effect. So we do not need to add, let's say, channels in the ceiling. Yeah? Practically it's much more difficult as well. Yeah? So having that quadraphonic layer above the corner speakers of the 5.1, that creates that immersive effect. It creates more that natural sound in front of us due to much more harmonics that we feel. And secondly, it creates that depth and that surrounding field, and that makes it very special. I was very intrigued when for the first time I tried, let's say, having back height speakers combined with the lower ones. That creates that very immersive effect for our brain. If you can trick our brain with believing that there is, let's say, like a safe environment around us with safe reflections, then it gives that immersive, relaxing effect. Having all these different channels is for our brain so much easier to analyze sound. And that's what we see as well. If you hear our 3D content, it's so much more relaxing. Music becomes so much more enjoyable because it gives that immersive effect emotionally. But secondly, it is for our brain so much easier to analyze the sound field around us. Today in Galaxy we're recording a scoring session is for a big musical, and what you see as well, we added a few microphones, height microphones, and capturing all the reflections of the room gives so much more natural colors of the orchestra and so much more depth. If you hear back afterwards the reproduction of that recording, it feels like you are part in that room, like you are sitting there. It brings you very close to the action where it is being recorded. So Galaxy Studio is not just about sound for music or sound for film, but we do as well image. We have a post-production image department. In 2006 we installed a 4K digital intermediate workflow. What does it mean, digital intermediate? So from the set, when the rolls are coming, the film rolls are coming, we are going to scan them. So we make analog digital, and afterwards we go from digital again to analog. Yeah? So here this is a laser system where we can laser in 4K technology, we can laser it back to film stock, and then we create the perfect 4K film print master. To give you an idea about 4K and 2K, you see here this is the normal PAL resolution, high definition. This is then 2K, this is the format that most cinemas has at this moment, and this is 4K, so it's 4 times a 2K picture. Now this scanner scans in 8K to bring a perfect 4K picture resolution. Yeah? To give you an idea, one picture has a size from about 50 megabytes. So if you have 24 frames per second, it's 1.2 gigabyte per second on data going to film to catch, let's say, the quality which was on a 35 millimeter film. So when the scans are happened, so they are on our sound, at that moment they start to do virtual effects, color grading, all this kind of let's say effects to make the picture as best as possible. And then we create 2 different masters. We create a digital master and an analog master. So the digital master is then for the digital cinema projectors, the analog master is of course for the analog projectors. At this moment there are less and less analog projectors, but still for archiving. People want to have one master archived in the analog sound quality because that longs for much longer compared to digital formats. So here we're coming in our grading suite. Yeah? We have a few grading suites. This is the smallest one. Sorry for being dark, but that's typically in the grading color room. It has to be completely black, so we have to control the colors. Yeah? So here you see our computer, the film light, the base light. Yeah? And on that one we can control all the details in the picture. Yeah? You can see even every tree can be controlled and light out differently, adding some colors. That's fantastic what they can do with digital color grading. In fact, it's like photoshopping, but then with moving picture. Yeah? So if the picture moves, yeah, all these kind of things are following automatically. Yeah? So yeah, that makes a lot of creative possibilities when you do digital color grading. So this is one of our sound design rooms. Typically in film, if you record a film, more than 90% we are going to add afterwards. Yeah? And we do that here already in Auro 3D. So we have here an Auro 11.1 system, which is typically the system what we are doing in cinema theaters as well. So 5.1 on the bottom, 5 up in the voice of God. So we are preparing all the sounds and sound design already in this format. So it comes from here to, let's say, to the premix dub stage. Yeah? It is already, let's say, the split and the vertical sounds already defined. Yeah? So then there's less work, let's say, in the next step in the workflow. Doing it in that way, we do not require any extra time to make Auro 3D compared to a 5.1 format. So here we are on the pre-dub stage. Typically if we have the sound design done and the Foley and as well as the dialogue editing, there are a lot of tracks coming out, sometimes more than 100, 200, 300 tracks. Yeah. So we cannot bring all the tracks together in a final mixing stage because then you're ending up with 700, 800 tracks. So what we're doing is pre-mixing it. We call it pre-dubbing. Yeah? So we see here the same setup but in a smaller version. from our auditorium, and the engineers are mixing here, let's say they're pre-mixing the whole stuff. We keep all the information virtual. That means even in the big stage we always can touch every small detail, but it's being pre-mixed already here in different stems. So a stem can be a dialogue, a music stem, Foley. So all these stems are coming together, pre-mixed to the final mixing stage, and then typically we are going to move between all the stems, but always, of course, if there's like certain aspects when all this information is coming together, perhaps you have to control certain details out of each stem. That's still possible nowadays with the technology we have here. So this was in fact worldwide the first full 3D sound capability room for mixing. We built it in 2010. After 3 years of development with EMS Neve, an UK company, they built in fact the first full 3D console with some pannings there where we can really fly around in 3D, let's say every sound. You see here as well the same concept. We have the ear level sound, we have the height layer, so we can make that virtual stereo field here as well as on the screen channels. We have 6 screen channels, and of course we have the overhead layer. So in this way we can really make the sound completely immersive, and it feels like you are part of what you are seeing on the screen. So what we have shown now in the CES is the first devices which can people buy to have Auro 3D experienced at home. We have now 3 devices coming on the market. The first we just launched is the Auro 3D Auriga, which is produced by Storm Audio, but Dataset as well is coming with two new devices, which is called Crux and Mensa. So the top model is the RS20E with our Auro 3D technology inside. It's called the Mensa. It's the star constellation. So typically, of course, Auro 3D starts with the top quality, the top brand, and when more and more people are buying Auro 3D systems, of course it will come as well to the mass market. It will come as well in headphones, but it will take some time. So there's many content coming. There are many films. You know that George Lucas in 2011, he was the first one picking up the Auro 3D format for the film industry, and Red Tails was then the first film produced. Then in 2012 we had already more than 30 films produced, last year even more. So it's expanding and expanding. In Hollywood, all the big Hollywood studios are having installed now the system. So there's a lot of new content coming on the market, but not only film content, there's coming as well a lot of music. More than 180 albums at this moment already recorded in the Auro 3D format. So we are busy now, let's say, to make them ready on a Blu-ray that people can have it and can experience that new, let's say, that new immersive sound format at home as well.